So for today's session, open data is more abundant than ever, but as many of you know, abundance doesn't automatically mean usability, especially now that AI agents can discover, retrieve, and reason over data sets on their own. In this session, Gautam's going to explore what it really takes to make open data agent ready, from structure and metadata to APIs, vector embeddings, knowledge graphs, governance as code, and emerging standards. We'll also look at why AI readiness isn't just a technical task, but it's an organizational one that treats data sets like products with clear ownership, provenance, and licensing that both people and AI can trust. So really excited to introduce our speaker, Gautam Krishnadas, this afternoon. Gautam is the co-founder of Detective, and Detective help organizations, including the Scottish Government, make data more discoverable, trustworthy, and AI ready. Gautam brings experience across research and industry, full stack data science, product design, and delivery, and he holds a PhD in applied AI from the University of Edinburgh. So the session today, Gautam's presentation should last somewhere between sort of 25-30 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions afterwards. So if you do have any questions, please make sure to pop them in the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom portal, and we'll get to those at the end. Any questions that we don't get to today, we'll post on the community forum, so Gautam can come online afterwards and can answer any questions that we might not have time for today. So that's enough from me. I'll hand you over to Gautam, and I'll see you afterwards for the Q&A.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Stephen. I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can see my slides, Stephen.
Yeah, that's working now. Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, all. Thank you so much for joining this session, and I'm really delighted to be part of this webinar today. And I believe the topic is very relevant to the broader umbrella of open data. And also, today happens to be the International Labor Day, and we are talking about agents. So think of these as your new digital colleagues who are very keen to work 24/7. But again, if you don't feed them the right data, they don't really function well. So it's quite interesting to think of how agents are going to interact with open data, and then trying to understand what more needs to be done in the open data landscape to make them ready for AI and other downstream use cases. Again, myself, Gautam, as Stephen introduced, I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Detective, and we work with organizations like the Scottish Government to make their data more discoverable, trustworthy, and usable. Now let's go back and understand what's happening behind the scenes when it comes to open data. How open data gets made. So firstly, it starts with the collection process or creation process, where governments or agencies, research bodies, NGOs, they might generate their own data or they collect from other third-party providers. And then there is a processing bit, which is cleaning, anonymizing, aggregating, validating the data so that it can be used later. And then comes a governance bit, which is about understanding the privacy aspects, ethical aspects, legalities, licensing. And then the data gets published on portals or catalogs, delivered through APIs or repositories. And as part of the process, they also regularly maintain the data, which includes updating, version control, and occasionally responding to feedback from users as well. So this is what is happening behind the scenes when it comes to open data. And then there's, as you can see, there's a long human chain here. So when we think of a future where AI is consuming the data, we need to be aware that this pipeline of activities are very much human heavy right now. Of course, a lot of AI is being embedded into these processes, but it's still very much of a human or a heuristic process, I would say. Now, let's talk about humans first before we talk about agents. So what do humans wrestle with today when it comes to data? First is discovery. So as you would have experienced yourself, there's plenty of data out there, but they're all scattered across portals, catalogs, etc. So finding the right data is hard. Second is inconsistent formats. So you would bump into CSV, Excel, JSON, PDFs, different formats across different portals. And what that means is if you're building an AI model or you want to analyze the data, you may occasionally need to transform a format from one to another. I'll give a quick example. You might have a table in a PDF. To analyze that table, you will need to extract that table from the PDF first to analyze it. Third and most important is context, which is in technical words, think of it as metadata, such as your titles, descriptions, tags that come along with your data. So if context is missing, then you don't really know what a particular column means or who collected the data, when the data was last updated, etc. Fourth is quality and bias, which is equally important. And by this, I mean, if your data contains errors or gaps or historical inequalities, then that kind of feeds into the insights that you generate from the data. So none of these are new to you. And then licensing. So of course, there's always uncertainty around licensing. Even if one would expect to see the appropriate licenses attached to data, sometimes they're missing. So you don't really know if you can use it commercially or if you can combine one data with another one and republish it. And finally, your data can go stale. So apparently half of the published data sets may not be refreshed on a portal and you're still looking at a very old, outdated data set. So there is that problem as well. And it's not just the data itself. If the data is outdated, or let's say the data is being updated, and the metadata can also go stale because no one's updating the metadata. So these are the kind of real world problems that humans deal with today when it comes to open data. So which also means that if you want to convert your raw data to insights, it can take a lot of time and your outputs need not always be reliable. Let's see how humans cope with the situation today. So one, of course, you got open data portals like National Records of Scotland, Ordnance Survey, Data Hub, and plenty of them, which do a good job of publishing data. Then there are a lot of organizations that do follow FAIR principles, which is making their data more findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, etc. Then there are metadata standards like DCAT3, Dublin Core, Inspire, which create like a common language through which you can, understand your data and share your data, reuse your data, etc. Again, this does exist, but it's not guaranteed that every publisher would necessarily follow metadata standards. Then comes search and discovery solutions. So one of the largest open data search engines out there is Google Dataset Search, which has indexed over 50 million datasets. Then Detective, along with the Scottish government, has also been working on a portal called find.data.gov.scot, which is currently one of the largest in Scotland, which has indexed over 25,000 datasets. So what all of these solutions have in common is they aggregate data published on open data portals and try to make the data more findable, understandable, etc. And then finally, there are communities which curate data as well as such as Wikidata, OpenStreetMaps, Hugging Face datasets. So all of these are the great things happening right now in the landscape, but then a lot of problems are still unsolved. For example, metadata is very insufficient. If you go to a portal, you don't necessarily get metadata for all the data sets. It may be very sparse sometimes. From our experience, when we did a quality assessment of metadata across open data portals in Scotland, we saw that the average came to around 3 stars out of 5, which is above average, certainly, but there's still more work to be done. And then because of all these problems, people end up spending a lot of time preparing the data. Firstly, finding the data, second, understanding the data, and then validating and preparing the data. So that's a big chunk of their time that goes into these activities, which mean that they don't spend enough time on actually building a model or analyzing the data to get the insights that they want. And then the quality, of course, is opaque. So you don't really understand if there are biases or gaps in the data, etc. Again, we talked about license problems. And then most of these metadata set documentations are built for humans today. It assumes that a human is reading it and not necessarily that a machine is reading it. So these are some of the problems which have not been solved yet from a human point of view, a human user point of view. Now let's talk about AI agents. Again, we are all hearing this term a lot these days, and one would say an agent has different components, such as there's a large language model that can understand languages and summarize languages, etc. And then there are tools which the model would want to use to conduct certain activities. And there are a lot of other things around this system that is what identifies themselves as an agent. So, for example, you might be using Claude for certain activities like writing a document, or you might be using Claude to perform some activities on your desktop, like organizing your files. So they're all examples of agents today. I wouldn't go deeper into that, but I'm sure this is something everyone's aware of. Now, we can talk a bit in terms of what the current data landscape is and how AI agents are going to interact with them, and what are the challenges that we need to address, because it's it's kind of an unavoidable situation that we're going through right now, which is agents are kind of getting embedded in all the processes. So it's also understood that they're going to interact with data, and that is the problem that we need to address early on, so that an agent should know what is the right data to use to make the right decision. Otherwise, there's no point of using agents in that process. So first is to understand where the world is in terms of ambition and readiness. So apparently, only 26% of chief data officers are confident that their data can support AI applications. Now, here we are talking about general AI readiness and not necessarily readiness for agentic AI. However, this gives you a nice understanding of where we are from a global point of view. Apparently, 75% of organizations name data quality as a major blocker to agentic AI, and only 31% have measurement frameworks in place for agentic AI. So there's also all sort of challenges out there which are being addressed. But the general feedback we're getting is that the world is moving towards a future where agents are getting embedded into a lot of processes. Now, how do agents fail quietly on open data? The first problem is they could pick a wrong dataset. So there's no standard way to ask, is there a dataset about X? And agents can settle for whatever ranks first. So it's more of a process where it looks at ranking and then picks one. And it can look at context, but the problem here is there's no context. So again, so what happens here is an agent would hallucinate a context, especially where the metadata is missing. And the agent would do this very confidently. And we would think that what you're getting is right, but it's not necessarily right. An agent can break because if a publisher is making any changes in a very non-standard way, then that can break agents as well. So there should be some consistency and standards being followed on that end. And then finally, if your data has biases, the agent wouldn't know. Or if your data doesn't tell you where it's coming from, then the agent wouldn't know where it's coming from either. So this failure is very silent. You may not notice it, but in summary, an agent rarely says like, I couldn't find good data. It just delivers you a confident wrong answer, in short. So that's the kind of situation we need to think ahead of time and then deal with. Now, one of the approaches to solve this problem has been in terms of thinking of introducing a concept of a passport for your data. And if you were attending one of the sessions by Professor Elena Simple from KCL, she would have talked about the COSON model that she and a lot of other people are working on as part of the ML Commons. So the COSON metadata model is it's like croissant itself. It's like you got your fillings and then you got your pastry layers. So your filling is your data, and then you're creating these pastry layers around your data to describe what's inside it. Now, croissant is built on the foundation of what is called as schema.org. So schema.org is kind of a metadata format where you got your descriptions of the data like titles, summaries, tags, etc. listed. But schema.org was never built for AI machine learning use cases necessarily. So for building a machine learning model, you would need to know what certain columns are, and you would need to know certain aspects of the data that would help you pick the right data quickly and then use it for your modeling. So Croissant kind of builds on top of schema.org to create a metadata format that is most suitable for machine learning AI use cases. This is already being implemented on datasets, Google dataset search, which I mentioned earlier as one of the largest dataset search engines out there. And what that means is if you're a publisher who uses schema.org, Google dataset search would have already found your data. Now, if you're a publisher who's using Croissant, Google would still find it. And it also makes your data more ready for machine learning use cases. In addition to all that, they've also introduced responsible AI extensions, such as fairness and compliance. So there's a great work happening out there in the world, and being adopted by Google and the likes. We are also thinking of adopting this on Find Out Data, one of the solutions I mentioned that we're working on with the Scottish government, so that it doesn't just solve the discoverability problem, but going forward, we can also make the data more agent ready. Now, when I say metadata schema, this is what it looks like. So you can see different fields and how they are filled in. Now, where you see CR is what is referred to as Croissant here. So this is the responsible AI extensions, which explain some data biases in simple language as well, so that your agent understands the bias in place. Otherwise, it wouldn't know. So this is the context you're building, and hence it's called the passport for your data. Another way to do this would be through data sheets. That again is something being worked upon by IBM, Google, etc. So it explains what is the motivation behind the data, why was it created, what's inside it, how the data was gathered, and then when you're using the data, what is it that you need to avoid. So all of that information that are typically not found in the data that we use these days, but we would hope to find so that it helps with our use cases later. So think of it like your data sheets that come with your hardware. What they're proposing is like a data sheet for your data. And that explains the data a lot better. And then finally, there's this concept of model cards, which is going a bit further in terms of data being used for building a machine learning or AI model, and then providing you information upfront in terms of what are the intended use cases of the data. Can your data be used for building a forecasting model, for instance? Or you can, again, talk about biases and failures and all that, and even link the data to the sources of data, etc. So that as a person who's building a model, you have all the information you need ahead of time. So those are three examples of standard practices happening out there, which are up for us to adopt to make your data more ready for downstream use cases such as agentic AI. The second thing is, in terms of strategies, to help your agents find the data and also each other. So you would have bumped into this concept of a model context protocol, which, if I take an analogy, they always talk about USB-C, which is like a common system that most of the devices these days have. Like your headphones have USB-C, or your chargers, or anything that you use these days, you have it. So the purpose of that is to make integrations easier. So MCP is the equivalent of a USB-C, where you got your agent in one place and then you got your search engine in one place, or your data portal. The question is, can your agent talk to your data portal? Right now, it cannot necessarily do that. And again, you might have experience trying to find data through ChatGPT, for instance. And ChatGPT need not necessarily search through every single portal to do that. And you would expect ChatGPT to do that, and that is where the challenge is. If your portal is more ready for such use cases, then it makes sense. So this is where MCP comes into play, and you're kind of building a wrapper around your data portal to then speak the language of agents. And the technology has come to a point where a lot of useful tools out there which can be easily adopted to enable this. So that is one thing. It was developed by MCP, and now it's under the Linux Foundation. And then second is your agent needs to talk to other agents, because we are moving into a future where a lot of activities are being performed by agents, and of course there has to be communication happening. So this is where agent to agent frameworks are being built, such as by this one by Google, built back in 2025. And then it's not just about how you communicate with your system, it's also about authentication and limiting how much the system should be used. So again, you got a data portal as a publisher, and you want to 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 define how these agents should talk to your data, what kind of permissions they should have, and how often they should talk to your data. Because compared to human traffic, again, because agents work like 24/7, you need to set your own limits in terms of that. So authentication and rate limiting is also important when it comes to communication between an agent and your system or your data portal, for example, and between agents as well. Now, if you put all of these things together, you can see that agent A here is talking to agent B using A to A frameworks. And then agents are trying to connect your data through MCP and some authentication layers. But then again, even that is not sufficient if you simply connect an agent to your data, because what is missing is the context. So this is where the passports come into play, like Cousin models or the other examples I gave. So this is where you have to prepare your data in different stages for an agentic future. And of course, there are a lot of good examples out there in the world where this is being adopted. For example, I mentioned about Google Dataset Search, which has already adopted Cousin model, and we are thinking of introducing Croissant on find out data as well as a way to make it more ready for use cases. MCP is a great way to enable that communication layer, so that you got some of the basics foundation sorted for your data portals to communicate with agents. Now, maybe until 2 years back, most of our thinking was in terms of making data discoverable and usable for everyone, for humans primarily. And we were thinking from an API point of view, perhaps, where you can have your data portal and you got your APIs that can be used to pull data from your portal, etc. But now it's gone beyond that, because agents would need a lot more to be able to access the data and do it in a very, very scalable way. So it's a great example of how this can be achieved. And then finally, once you've sorted your context, communication, and all that, it's about retrieval, evaluation, and trust. So this is where you're introducing concepts like hybrid search. So hybrid search means you can do like simple search with semantic or contextual search. And of course, there are a lot of search engines out there that can enable this these days. You got concepts of knowledge graphs to access structured public data. Context engineering is an evolving domain of how exactly you can generate the context and then provide in the right way to your system, because your data inherently doesn't have language. Of course, there are some text within your data files which may not be sufficient to understand the data. So you're kind of building that language to help a language model understand your data better. So retrieval is important, for which you have to provide context. And second is evaluation. So you need to treat your data like code, and there should be metrics to evaluate your data as well. So once you think of the data sheet kind of concept, you got a data sheet for your data, then you can also set parameters through which you can evaluate your data before you publish it, for instance. And then finally, when it comes to governance, you have to embed governance within the data itself. You have to embed quality, lineage information, etc. Human in the loop is very important here, because again, the human understanding is important when it comes to publishing data. So you can't really hand over everything to automation here. There should always be a quality control happening when it comes to data publication, etc. So that is important. And of course, We need to audit for biases in the best possible way. So all of these are foundational activities that can be done so that we are better prepared for a future where you got more agents trying to talk to your data. And just a closing comment to say that open data was built for knowledge to be shared. So it's more of our responsibility to make it also ready for agents, because it's again an inevitable evolution of how things are moving forward in the world. So from a data publisher point of view, it's very important to ensure that we follow the right standards and practices when it comes to publishing, and also have that thinking in mind when it comes to who's going to use the data. AI builders, of course, need to start using the open data that follows these kind of frameworks and standards to provide feedback to publishers. And of course, civil society is an important stakeholder in the whole process. This is still a very high level overview of where we are right now, what could be done. Of course, I'd like to do a deeper dive later in the future to go through more details of how this can be done. And we also have our own case studies going on where we are trying to implement some of these and hoping to collect feedback from users as well to see how this can be done in a better way. So I'm just going to stop sharing here and just open this for any questions that you might have.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Gautam. Yeah, that was really interesting. We've had quite a lot of questions coming in, so if anybody does have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get through them as many as we can. But from the ones we've got through so far, I think maybe the first one to start with is from someone who's asking, they said, what kind of companies or sectors do you see where agent-ready data would have the most impact? So this person's saying that they work in an SME in the tourism sector, and they're kind of struggling to understand where their time is best spent, and whether this is the sort of thing that they should be focusing on or not.
Right. It may be hard to pick an industry where agents are going to be most useful. So I'm just thinking aloud, if I could pick one from my own experience here. I would say, from my experience, there are predominantly data-rich industries, of course. So, for example, health, education, environment. But then if you look at the next couple of years, pretty much every industry will be generating lots of data as well. So as of today, if you're picking a few sectors like health, then the question is how much of agentic AI readiness is necessary in that sector. And health being a very regulated sector as well, it can be challenging to think of everything being done by agents immediately. So I would say there are certain sectors where you can take some time to figure out what is the best approach, and also start experimenting with tools that can make your data AI ready or agentic ready. But then the future is, in the future, of course, as every industry or sector gets data rich, then and as more AI is getting embedded, one would imagine that these activities will become inevitable. So it's kind of starting early for a future that is not too far, I would say.
Right, thanks very much. We've also got somebody who's asking, when describing how open data gets made, why isn't governance listed as the first or an earlier step in the process? Would it not prevent some issues if governance considerations were engaged with before collecting or processing the data?
Sorry, could you come again on that, Stephen? I missed the third.
Yes, so they've asked, when describing how open data gets made, why isn't governance listed as the first or an earlier step in the process? And would it not prevent some issues if governance considerations were engaged with before the collection or processing of the data?
Yes, absolutely. So the way I presented it may not be the most appropriate way. So yes, governance is an important aspect, and it comes into picture mostly at the point of data collection and publication. And of course, there are processes in place within every organization that publishes data very strictly. And so yeah, it is certainly important. But the question is, again, currently there's a very human-centric processes. So one would want to question how much they have been adapted to downstream use cases where an agent is taking over. So what are the changes you might need to make in terms of governance to enable that kind of a future? So those are the things which we may need to address. But yes, certainly governance is a major part of the publication process, and there's no question about that.
Thanks very much. And there's a question coming kind of around the sort of time and resource that it kind of takes to kind of prepare data to become agent ready. In your experience, is this something that needs like the organization behind it, or is it something that like one person could be working on, or have you got any kind of kind of experience around how much resource is required to make the data agent ready?
Yeah, so from our own experience working on the Find Out Data website for the Scottish Government, we have looked into over 70 open data portals. And in total, there were like 26,000 data sets coming through those portals. So when it comes to, let's say, taking different steps, first is discoverability. So when you publish your data, again, are you following the right metadata practices to generate context for humans? And then the question is, when we did this research in Scotland, we saw only less than 30% of portals were actually following good metadata practices, best metadata practices. So then we had to look into how to make or how to address that problem. So first step is to ensure that you got the right metadata in place and you got systems in place to generate the right metadata. And then once you have that system in place, then it's about scalability. So if you're publishing 1,000 data sets, can you do this at scale? Can you generate metadata at scale? Can you do this repeatedly every year if your data is changing? So all of that will ensure that you got your semantics right for your data, or the language for your data right, which of course is important for humans. But then that is also one step towards making your data AI ready. The second task is in terms of the technologies that you need. For example, the model context protocol, your USB-C, that you need to create for an agent to communicate. And again, there are tools out there which any developer can use to build an MCP layer around your portal, so that your portal kind of qualifies to be ready for an agentic conversation. So somewhere on the other end of the world, there's an agent talking to your portal and trying to fetch your data, or maybe even do some analysis with your data later. So all of that is now possible with these kind of MCP around it. And of course, I didn't go deeper into croissant kind of models because yes, that is part of your metadata generation process. Once you have the system in place, it's pretty easy to scale it up and continue using it. So I wouldn't say it's rocket science because all the technology is available. If you're a publisher thinking of using these tools, then it's all out there. It's just about starting to use them in the right way, ahead of time, I would say, so that you get enough feedback to make it better when the time comes.
Right, thank you. You mentioned croissant there. We've had a question coming in from somebody who's asking, who currently is responsible for annotating historical and perhaps poorly annotated data sets using something like croissant? Is it a citizen science-esque task, or is it not for use in historical data sets, and instead sets a modern standard for open data going forward?
So we have also recently bumped into croissant through conversations with Professor Elena, and we have started diving deeper into how to use it. So there are a lot of, let's say, so if you look deeper into metadata itself, there are different fields within metadata, some of which can be generated from the data, some of which would need a conversation with someone who created the data in the first place, because you don't necessarily know where the data is coming from or how it was collected, so if you talk about historical data, maybe you will never meet the person who collected the data. So it's really hard to generate that kind of metadata or context, even regardless of what kind of data you're working with. So there will be challenges that that are inherent to these kind of situations. So I wouldn't say any metadata standard can fix it, but it's also about thinking ahead. For example, when you're collecting data, if you know that for downstream use cases, you need to have the right metadata in place, then someone who's collecting the data will do that job well. If they don't have that kind of a perspective, then they may not do that.
Right, thanks very much. We've got a couple of questions in from Suda, who's asking, are there any emerging standards for publishing decision evidence, not just operational datasets as open data?
I don't think I'm an expert on that. Would need to do my own research into that. Sorry.
No,
But in
fair
terms
enough.
of decision evidence, I would say, yeah, I think so. You're thinking more from a use case point of view when you say decision evidence. So again, the model card concept kind of goes in that direction, I guess, where the model card will tell you what are the intended use cases for your data. And currently, if you go to any portal, again, at least I haven't come across a portal which tells you, talks about different use cases, which would have helped someone who's going to use the data later.
We've got a follow-up question from Suda is asking, when an agent picks, Suda's actually just said, I'm developing synthetic data. She's developing synthetic data for decision records. And has also asked, when an agent picks the wrong data set and delivers a confident answer, perhaps wrongly, who would be accountable for that? Would it be the publishers, the agent builders, or the organizations that deployed it, or is that a bit of an unknown?
Good question. So I guess I think you'll have to assess the impact first. Let's say you get a wrong answer decision, what the impact is, and then second is you're asking who's responsible. So maybe it's a shared responsibility, I would say, because the purpose of open data is for everyone to use and then generate knowledge. So let's say those who are publishing data, they do their best. And then those who are accessing the data, they do their best in accessing it the right way. And then finally you get your output from your agents. Then it's like, for me, it's a shared responsibility, but again, it's my perspective, so that might change.
Thanks very much. And we've got maybe this maybe we've got time for two more questions. So we've got this question coming in. It's maybe more around a bit of an explanation around what are the benefits of making your data AI agent ready in the first place. So like, what is it that agents can do that humans can't do that justifies the time spent making the data sets AI agent ready in the first place? Could you maybe kind of stripping it back a little bit to the sort of reason for doing it?
All right, yeah. So that's like, yeah, we need to go back a few steps to explain AI agents again. So again, it's probably an early stage where you would have noticed agents being embedded into different processes that humans are anyways working on right now. And again, it's it's something we can't stop as a society, I guess. So it's happening. So take any area, any domain, there's going to be an agentic worker, maybe sitting beside a human worker doing a lot of repetitive tasks. So let's pick one repetitive task, which is about, let's say, generating some particular insight from data every day that maybe a human data analyst is doing today, which potentially may be done by an agentic AI in the future, and the human analyst would have a much of a more value-added responsibility at that point. Then the question is your data ready for an agent? If not, there will of course be a lot of preparation and pre-processing work for the human. So the benefits, I would say, are more in terms of the outcome. Anything that a human would achieve in a few hours is something an agent would do in a few minutes or seconds. So again, there's always this questions, the philosophical questions about agents replacing humans and all that. So I'm not going into that domain right now, but in terms of benefits, of course, if you're looking at the outcomes of what comes out of these processes, then it'll benefit us as a society. And then we need to think of what goes into these models. If what goes into the models are bad, then the outcomes are bad as well. So probably our responsibility as humans right now is to ensure that whatever data is out there, we get them in the right shape so that agents, when they start using them, are ready and also can give the right kind of outputs.
There's a bit of preparation for the future when AI agents become more prevalent and more kind of established in the way people work more generally.
Absolutely, yeah. And I wouldn't think it's going to be like a big jump immediately. It's going to be like a slow transition. So I come from a data analysis, data science background myself. Back in the days, I used to build models, forecasting models, and I had to spend a lot of time validating data, cleaning data, etc. And now, let's say an agent has taken over to do analysis. Then again, if the data is not ready, there's still a lot of pre-processing that you would need to do, or building those kind of communication layers in place so that your agent can talk to your data, for instance. So there's going to be a slow transition from where we are today to a point where a lot of agents do start using the data directly, and it's also a cautionary thing, like to know that you don't want your agent to use the data which doesn't have much context, especially if you're using the output from the agent for any critical decisions in sectors like health, for instance. That can be terrible. So mhm.
I guess as well, the the job of preparing existing data for AI readiness is potentially quite a big task, depending on how much data an organization has to kind of update. But
Yeah,
once you get these processes in place and you know what you're doing, and it becomes part of your general workflow
yeah.
moving forward, if organizations do it properly, then their data will generally be AI ready as the default. I imagine is the kind of the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of organizations, including the Scottish government, which is putting a lot of effort into generating context for their data for humans right now. Of course, there's no visibility of agents using any of those right now. But let's say for humans, you still need context for your data, which is the metadata. And then again, you can involve humans to generate metadata, or you can use AI itself to generate metadata with human in the loop. So that's a context problem solved, which is something very much doable today. And then you got the communication layers, which enable communication or access for your agentic AI. Again, the technology is there. It's about willingness to adopt it. And the question is when to start adopting them.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We've run out of time, unfortunately, but thanks very much for coming along, Gautam. Um, Linda, yeah, the Q&A's closed. We've run out of time, I'm afraid, Linda. But thanks for joining. The so this has been the kind of the final session in our Open Data Month in the community. We have recorded today as well, so if anybody would like to kind of rewatch any of this session today, the recording will come up on the Data Labs YouTube within the next couple of days, and we'll send an email around once it's available. If you do have any questions that we've not managed to get to, or anything comes to mind, we'll be setting up a forum post in the Data Lab community with the recording. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment them underneath on the forum, and Gautam can come online afterwards to answer those kind of by text. But otherwise, thanks very much, Gautam, for joining us. The next thing's coming up in the Data Lab community. We've got a couple of webinars coming up in May around kind of the financial sector and education. And then the big event that we've got coming up at the end of May is DataFest, the Data Labs annual conference, which is taking place on the 27th and the 28th of May at the Assembly Rooms in Edinburgh. So if you are interested in coming along, the programme has been announced and our headline speakers are also announced. We've got Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, coming along, as well as a whole host of other speakers that are joining us for the 2 days in Edinburgh. So yeah, if you've not got your tickets yet, please do check out the website datafest.global and come along. But otherwise, thanks again for everybody for coming along, and see you next time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.